They called him Dirty Dave. And even among the blood-soaked legends of the Old West, Dave Rudabaugh stood out for all the wrong reasons. A gunslinger, rustler, train robber, and hired gun with a reputation so ruthless that even Billy the Kid supposedly kept one eye on him. He cheated death time and again, but in the end, it came for him in a way as wild and grisly as his life. If you're ready to meet one of the West's darkest and deadliest figures, saddle up. This story pulls no punches. If you love stories of real outlaws, brutal justice, and the gritty truth of the American frontier, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a ride through Old West history. David Rudabaugh carved out a name for himself in the lore of the American Old West, not just as a cowboy, but also as a man frequently on the wrong side of the law. He became known for his involvement in various outlaw activities, and though he often operated in the company of infamous figures, his own story remains one of the more shadowy tales of the frontier. In more recent years, writers and historians have nicknamed him Dirty Dave, a label rooted in anecdotes about his supposed dislike for bathing. However, it's worth noting that no contemporary accounts from Rudabaugh's lifetime support this nickname. The term likely reflects modern storytelling conventions rather than authentic 19th century descriptions, suggesting a case of legend overtaking fact. Rudabaugh's life began in Fulton County, Illinois, in 1854. His early years were marked by personal loss. His father died while serving during the Civil War, a common fate for many families during that turbulent period. The impact of this loss likely shaped Rudabaugh's outlook on life and may have influenced his later decisions. Following the death of his father, the Rudabaugh family relocated several times. They first moved to Ohio and eventually settled in Kansas. During the late 19th century, Kansas was a rapidly changing region, transitioning from frontier territory to a more settled part of the country. It was also a hotbed of opportunity and conflict, and many young men, especially those without a strong support system, found themselves drawn into lives of lawlessness or irregular employment on the fringes of society. Rudabaugh's early environment, a blend of instability, opportunity, and shifting cultural norms, helped set the stage for his eventual path into the more dangerous circles of the Old West. While many stories focus on the more sensational aspects of his adult life, understanding his upbringing provides crucial context for the choices he made and the legend he left behind. Old West Outlaw. Dave Rudabaugh's reputation as an outlaw began to take clearer shape in the early 1870s, during his time in Arkansas. It was there that he became associated with a group of men who operated outside the law, engaging in theft and cattle rustling, two of the most common outlaw activities during that era. Among his known associates were Milton Yarbury, who would later become a controversial lawman in New Mexico, and the enigmatic figure known as Mysterious Dave Mather. These men were part of a loosely organized group, reflective of how many outlaw bands functioned in the post-Civil War West, less like formal gangs and more like shifting alliances driven by opportunity. Their activities caught the attention of local authorities, particularly after suspicions arose around the death of a local rancher. Although no formal charges appear to have been filed, the scrutiny was intense enough that all three men left Arkansas. Historical accounts diverge at this point. Some suggest that Rudabaugh and his companions moved to Decatur, Texas, a town known at the time for being a rough frontier settlement. Others believe that Rudabaugh separated from the group and traveled north to the Black Hills of South Dakota. The Black Hills during the mid-1870s were booming with prospectors and entrepreneurs following the discovery of gold in the region. With this influx came opportunities for both honest work and criminal enterprise. Rudabaugh is believed to have taken advantage of the situation, allegedly turning to stagecoach robbery, a crime that targeted the flow of money and mail through remote areas and was difficult to prevent due to the lack of law enforcement in many regions. Around 1876, Rudabaugh reportedly teamed up with Mike Rourke and Dan Dement to form a group later dubbed the Trio. The name wasn't necessarily used at the time, but has been applied retroactively by historians to describe their known activities. While the specifics of their exploits remain somewhat vague, they appear to have operated as a cooperative group, working together on various thefts and possibly engaging in fraudulent gambling as well. An intriguing but unverified story from this period claims that Rudabaugh and the infamous Doc Holliday crossed paths in an unusual way. According to legend, Rudabaugh taught Holliday how to handle a pistol, while Holliday, already known for his skill at the card table, returned the favor by teaching Rudabaugh the finer strategies of gambling. While this account cannot be fully confirmed, it reflects how easily figures in the Old West move between roles as gamblers, outlaws, hired hands, or sometimes even peace officers. In October 1876, Rudabaugh allegedly participated in the robbery of a construction camp along the Santa Fe Railroad line. Such camps were often prime targets, as workers were frequently paid in cash and security was minimal. Following this incident, Rudabaugh fled southward, evading local law enforcement. His escape prompted authorities to act. One of the men brought into the pursuit was Wyatt Earp, who was temporarily commissioned as a deputy U.S. Marshal. Earp left Dodge City and tracked Rudabaugh across more than 400 miles, a testament to the law's growing efforts during that time to assert control over transient outlaws. Rudabaugh reached Fort Griffin, Texas, a frontier outpost along the Clear Fork of the Brazos River, just days ahead of his pursuer. When Earp arrived in Fort Griffin, he made his way to the town's largest establishment, the Shancy Saloon. Its owner, John Shancy, had known Earp since the early days of their youth. Though Shancy wasn't sure where Rudabaugh had gone, he mentioned that the outlaw had recently passed through and suggested that Earp speak with a local gambler named Doc Holliday, who had played cards with him. This meeting between Earp and Holliday would prove pivotal, not only in the pursuit of Rudabaugh, but also in the formation of one of the most legendary friendships in Old West history. Holliday told Earp that Rudabaugh might be heading back toward Kansas. Acting quickly, Earp relayed this intelligence via telegram to Bat Masterson, who was also involved in law enforcement efforts at the time. That message would contribute to Rudabaugh's eventual apprehension. Capture and release. Dave Rudabaugh's involvement in train robbery began in early 1878, an era when such crimes were increasing due to the growing presence of railroads across the American West. On January 22nd of that year, Rudabaugh and his gang made an attempt to rob a train near Kinsley, Kansas. However, the plan quickly unraveled. The operation failed entirely, and the gang walked away with nothing to show for it, a testament to their lack of experience or poor planning. Law enforcement responded swiftly. The very next day, a posse was assembled under the leadership of Bat Masterson, a well-known figure in law enforcement circles at the time. Masterson was joined by John Joshua Webb, who would go on to play a recurring role in Rudabaugh's life. Together, they managed to apprehend Rudabaugh and one of his accomplices, Ed West. The remaining members of the gang were tracked down and taken into custody not long after. Facing serious consequences, Rudabaugh made a practical decision. He agreed to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for immunity. This legal strategy was not uncommon in the Old West, where turning state's evidence often allowed one offender to avoid prosecution by testifying against others. Rudabaugh's willingness to testify against his former partners underscores his adaptability and perhaps his instinct for self-preservation. Following his release, Rudabaugh did not retreat from frontier life. Instead, he accepted an offer from Bat Masterson to join a group of hired gunmen working for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. At the time, railroad companies were engaged in the fierce rivalries known as the Railroad Wars, competing over routes and land rights. These conflicts sometimes escalated into physical confrontations, prompting companies to employ armed men for protection and intimidation. Rudabaugh's role in this setting reveals how the line between outlaw and hired hand could blur depending on circumstance and allegiance. During this period, Rudabaugh developed a close alliance with John Joshua Webb, the same man who had helped arrest him only months before. Such shifts in loyalty were not unusual in the West, where survival often depended on practical alliances more than moral consistency. Rudabaugh and Webb traveled together to Las Vegas, New Mexico, a town that was growing rapidly and attracting a diverse mix of settlers, entrepreneurs, and opportunists. In Las Vegas, they became active members of what came to be known as the Dodge City Gang, a loosely organized group of gamblers, saloon operators, and toughs who exerted considerable influence over the town's political and economic life. The group's informal leader was Hyman G. Neal, better known as Hoodoo Brown, who also held positions of official authority, giving the gang a thin veil of legitimacy. Rudabaugh, with his experience and connections, found himself well positioned in this environment. By the spring of 1880, trouble began brewing within the gang. John Joshua Webb was arrested and charged with murder, placing him in serious legal jeopardy. In a show of loyalty or desperation, or perhaps both, Rudabaugh attempted to secure Webb's release. On April 5th, he and another gang member tried to break Webb out of jail. The escape attempt failed. In the midst of the chaos, Deputy Sheriff Antonio Lino Valdez lost his life. While the act was seen at the time as part of a violent confrontation, it also marked a turning point in Rudabaugh's downward spiral. His involvement in this incident made him a more urgent target for law enforcement, and his growing list of conflicts made reintegration into society increasingly unlikely. The rustlers and capture. After the failed jailbreak in Las Vegas, Dave Rudabaugh fled southeast and made his way to Fort Sumner, New Mexico. At the time, Fort Sumner was a known gathering spot for various figures who lived on the edge of the law. There, Rudabaugh became affiliated with a group of outlaws, one of whom was the now legendary Billy the Kid. Though Rudabaugh and Billy the Kid shared some time as associates, their personalities and reputations were quite different. Billy was known for his charisma and local support, while Rudabaugh carried a more ominous reputation. Their time together came to an abrupt end at a location called Stinking Springs, near what is now the town of Tybon, New Mexico. On December 23, 1880, a posse led by Pat Garrett, who had recently been appointed sheriff of Lincoln County, surrounded and captured the group. Alongside Rudabaugh and Billy the Kid were Billy Wilson and several others. The arrest was a major event, drawing significant attention across New Mexico territory. Initially, the captives were taken to Las Vegas. However, tensions were high, and local anger over past incidents, particularly the death of Deputy Valdez, raised concerns about mob justice. To prevent any unlawful retaliation, the authorities made the decision to transfer Rudabaugh and the others to Santa Fe, where they would face formal legal proceedings in a more controlled setting. In February 1881, Rudabaugh appeared before the court. Faced with substantial evidence, he entered a guilty plea to multiple charges related to mail theft, a serious federal offense at the time. The court responded with a sentence of 99 years in prison, reflecting the gravity of the crimes. But this was not the end of Rudabaugh's legal troubles. Soon afterward, he was also found guilty in connection with the death of Deputy Antonio Lino Valdez, a case that had stirred deep resentment in the Las Vegas community. As a result, he was handed an additional sentence, this time capital punishment. While awaiting execution, Rudabaugh was held in jail, where he was reunited with his old ally, John Joshua Webb. Their shared past, which had included train robberies and attempted jailbreaks, now found them both on the other side of the law's mercy. The conditions of territorial jails in the early 1880s were often poor, and security was far from infallible. At one point, the two attempted an escape. During the chaotic effort, another inmate, Thomas Duffy, lost his life under unclear circumstances. Though the attempt failed at first, Rudabaugh and Webb eventually managed to break free. Rudabaugh fled westward once again, this time heading into Arizona territory, where the law was still patchy and factions often replaced formal authority. In Arizona, Rudabaugh is believed to have aligned himself with the so-called Clanton faction, a group involved in regional disputes that had both political and personal dimensions. This group, centered around the Clanton family, was in a bitter conflict with the Earp brothers, who were serving in law enforcement roles in Tombstone. While there is no definitive proof, several accounts from the period suggest Rudabaugh may have played a role in the ambush of Virgil Earp and the fatal attack on Morgan Earp. He is also speculated to have been present during the later confrontation at Iron Springs, where Curly Bill Brocius lost his life in a shootout with Wyatt Earp. Though much of this remains part of Western lore rather than hard evidence, it reflects how Rudabaugh continued to gravitate toward trouble, and how his name became entangled with some of the most infamous conflicts of the Old West. Death. After the Clanton faction dissolved and tensions in Arizona cooled, Dave Rudabaugh crossed the border into Mexico in search of a new beginning, or perhaps simply a place where his name carried less baggage. He eventually settled in the northern region of the country, particularly around the town of Parral in the state of Chihuahua. There, Rudabaugh reportedly found work as both a cowboy and, according to some accounts, became involved in livestock theft, an activity that blurred the line between survival and criminality in the rugged northern frontier. Life in Parral was a far cry from the chaotic saloons of Dodge City or the high-stakes feuds of Tombstone. However, it was still a place where tempers flared quickly, especially in gambling halls where reputations were always on the line. On February 18, 1886, Rudabaugh became involved in a dispute during a card game, an all-too-common spark for personal conflict in the Old West and beyond. Accounts say that a confrontation broke out between Rudabaugh and several locals. In the aftermath, two men reportedly lost their lives and another was injured. Rudabaugh managed to leave the establishment unharmed. However, upon realizing he had lost track of his horse, a vital companion for any man in that part of the world, he returned to retrieve it. That decision proved fatal. Upon re-entering the saloon, Rudabaugh was confronted by others and sustained multiple gunshot wounds. He did not survive the incident. What followed was a grim postscript to his long and tangled story. Local tradition holds that his body was desecrated and publicly displayed. Though shocking by today's standards, such acts were occasionally carried out in frontier communities as a symbolic warning, especially against those perceived as foreign troublemakers. Over the years, legends about Rudabaugh's final days have multiplied. One version claims he was affiliated with Soapy Smith's gang in Denver and was killed during a miners' dispute near Cripple Creek, Colorado. While this tale adds intrigue, it's not supported by historical evidence and likely confuses Rudabaugh with other outlaws of the period. What remains indisputable, however, is Rudabaugh's remarkable ability to appear at pivotal moments in Old West history. He was the only known outlaw to have crossed paths, either as friend, foe, or fugitive, with a remarkable lineup of Western icons: Dave Mather, Bat Masterson, Pat Garrett, Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, and Doc Holliday. His life wasn't one of legend-making heroism, nor was it driven by clear purpose. Instead, it reflected the chaotic energy of the American frontier, unpredictable, unrooted, and endlessly entangled with the era's lawmen, drifters, and dreamers. Dave Rudabaugh's name may not ring as loud as Billy the Kid or Wyatt Earp, but his fingerprints are all over the bloodstained map of the Old West. He was a man who never stayed in one place too long, never held loyalty for more than a season, and crossed paths with nearly every major figure of frontier folklore. From Dodge City to the dusty cantinas of Mexico, his life reads like a who's who of Western legend, and a cautionary tale about how quickly the line between outlaw and legend could blur. Whether he was a restless wanderer, a survivor of circumstance, or simply a man who couldn't outrun his choices, one thing's for sure: Dave Rudabaugh wasn't just feared, he was unforgettable. Like stories that dig deeper than the dime novels ever dared. Hit that subscribe button and ride with us into the untamed heart of the Old West, where every legend has a shadow and every gunman has a story.